Hello, everybody. Just want to give you guys a little story. I want to share a story that Master Jose Gonzales shared with me back when he was training under Preston Carter. Let me get my notes up. Shihan Carter, Preston Carter. He taught a system called Kudo Shudokan. Shudokan was the root system. Kudo was his take on it, his addition to it. And he was about 16 years old. And training with Preston Carter, he eventually trained all the way to Godan, fifth degree black belt. Um, the emphasis was on hundreds of repetitions of basics. There were only about 12 kata, and the last three included weapons, bow, sai, and tonfa. Lots of work on kumite, fighting, sparring, and tameshiwara, breaking boards and bricks and tiles and whatnot. He said one thing that happened was, Shihan Carter got shot in an altercation and he was paralyzed below the waist. He was in a wheelchair. He continued to teach in the wheelchair. And Jose was also training at the Trenton PAL, and Frank Stallone was there as well. And he said Shihan Carter told him, if you make the system look bad, I'm going to get up out this chair. You're going to have to deal with me. Um, you know, and this is interesting because Jose, back then, many karateka were not encouraged to cross train in boxing. They were prohibited from cross training in boxing and other styles. Part of that was they wanted loyalty. They were also afraid, if the student lost, it would make the school look bad. Um, and to be fair, if you've never boxed before and you put on those gloves, the gloves take away a lot of your power. Your defensive moves are not suited to blocking boxing punches and boxing range. So a lot of people were afraid, but Shihan Carter, he says, Shihan Carter always told me, if you spar them boxers and make me or our system look like they're laughing stock, you're going to deal with me. And he said that when he was in there sparring, oftentimes a student of Shihan Carter, Clarence Leach, he was spaghetti thin and tall, but really fast technician, would pop up at the Police Athletic League on Carter's order unannounced, and if I was sparring, would stay and watch the sparring and report back. And once Shihan Carter says to me, I heard Gonzalez was sparring Pop Nance, the New Jersey Golden Gloves champ. I heard Pop Nance effed you up the other day, with a grin, then says, you did all right, and then yells, Nippon Kudo. And that's just amazing. This is 1975, 76. I mean, my family came here in 1975 to the United States as legal immigrants. We were invited to come here. My dad, had a science degree and was a lab technician. And, this is just cool because it talks about how even back then people were cross training. Jose was quite good at boxing. He boxed a long time at the Trenton PAL, still shows up there and works out. He's still a martial artist. He cross trained with his friend, the late Craig DeVries, who he taught in the beginning, and Craig joined Chin's Karate, and I think he got a brown belt or red belt in that, and kind of never tested but continued to train. I met Craig DeVries when he was alive. He was a fantastic kicker, amazing kicking technician, and brash guy, just filled with energy. And he'd also trained in Okinawa up to brown belt in some type of Okinawan Kempo, so he was a formidable guy. And Jose was talking about how back then he was one of the renegades out there. And he talked about some instances. Let's get a few names over here. Talked about how him and Craig would sometimes, there was a Japan Karate Association tournament run by Master Katsuya Kisaka. Master Teruyuki Okazaki was there, different people from Philadelphia, and him and Craig went there in their white gis and kind of snuck in white gis and sneakers to spectate, probably to avoid paying. They got a little bored with the action. They went outside and started sparring each other and blasting each other full contact with all kinds of techniques, spinning kicks. And he said, he threw a left hook to Craig's body, dropped him to his knees, and Steve Chambers, who was also spectating the late, I don't know if he's still alive, but Steve Chambers was officiating and said, "Okay, that's enough. You guys are doing fine." And then I said, "I've got to share this story," and he wanted to say that I need to mention some of the names of some of the people that Jose cross trained with at the Trenton PAL. So let me pull the names up. So in 1975, Leach was the advanced student of Carter, and Pop Nance was a 165 pound version of Mike Tyson. He was a Golden Gloves champ. Jose sparred with him more than one time, and he said he was always a tough fighter. Another guy was Randy Rivers, Melvin Richardson. Melvin was one of the few Trenton boxers who always helped karate guys, because the karate guys, I mean, they were kind of the laughing stock of the boxing gym, because if you take away their kicks, their foot sweeps, their hands were not good for boxing. Their defense was pretty shoddy for boxing. A lot of this has to do with karate originally was not designed as a long range striking art. It's actually, most of it is in clinch range. And a lot of these so called blocking moves are not even blocks at all. They're strikes to vital points, they're grappling maneuvers, they're joint attacks. And they're useless as far as blocking boxing in boxing range. And he said, he got the snot beat out of him sparring originally when he first went to the Trenton Police Athletic League, and then he adapted and he basically learned to kickbox. He still loves traditional karate. He still loves boxing and kickboxing, and he's still going at it. And I just wanted to mention that because in this modern era, people forget before there was MMA, people were cross training. And another story Jose told me, which again I think makes a fantastic story, is he did some sports in high school and he tried out for the wrestling team. And there was a guy, I think his name was Porter, who was really a big time wrestler at that school, really big guy. And as part of the tryouts, he had to wrestle him. And he said somehow he reached under and sort of like grabbed his crotch, picked him up, and slammed him. And the coach called it off. And he never did try out for wrestling. And he never did do wrestling. I think they sort of marked him as a black sheep, and people were like, "You slam Porter, you slam Porter." But this just goes to show you there was a guy, 1975-76, Steinert High School, there was a guy in New Jersey who had done boxing and karate and wrestled and out wrestled a wrestler. At least once in his life. He said it was a fluke. He doesn't think he could ever do it again, but that's the way it is. You sometimes throw yourself out there and you find out you can do things you didn't think you could do. That's just the way the subconscious mind works sometimes, right? But I want anybody, I don't know if I have many young people. I hope I do. But if you are cross training in MMA, I want you to realize that before 1993, a lot of development went into developing the fight game in America. In not just the UFC and Bellator, but before that there was the PKA, and before that you had the open tournament scene, and you had people meeting sort of underground impromptu and putting stuff together. That's the nature of things, right? And so if you meet someone who's a martial artist back in those days and you talk to them, ask them, did you cross train? Did you box? What were the boxers like? What were the kickboxers like? If you're lucky, maybe you'll bump into someone who was doing it back then and can give you some pointers. People forget, for example, Chuck Norris. He started out in judo overseas in Korea. He broke his arm. During the period where he broke his arm, he discovered Tang Sudo, started cross training in Tang Sudo. His arm healed. He came back to learn judo. Not only did he come to the U.S. with a black belt in Tang Sudo, he had a brown belt in judo. So he had grappling experience way back then in the 60s, right? The knowledge is out there, and I strongly encourage you to seek it out. Don't just discard or disregard some of the martial artists around you. specifically the older ones, just because, well, they're not doing MMA, or well, they don't know Brazilian Jiu Jitsu. You might learn a thing or two, and you might hear some amazing stories like I have, and that alone is worth it. All right. So thank you all for listening, and thank you, Jose, for telling me this story. You keeps telling me all these stories of way back when. I can't repeat some of them. Some of them are, kind of raunchy stories of people, or might make some people look bad. But it is what it is. That's where I grew up, and I love hearing about it. And I hope you all enjoyed what I'm sharing. Y'all have a nice day.